Welcome to 3 Minute Warning, a Canadian Football League podcast. We're a member of All Sports, All Plays Network. My name is Bill Beer at Pigskin Punk 13 on Twitter. And joining me tonight, Dallas Bergen at CFL Toronto on Twitter. And all our CFL games that we're going to be discussing are on ESPN Plus in the United States and TSN in Canada. Welcome to episode 5 of 3 Minute Warning. How's it going, Dallas?
Hey, Bill, doing great here. Beautiful sunny fall day in Toronto, and just got out and got some sun today. Really enjoyed Ottawa's big win last night, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but that was really exciting and I think really great for the league as well. And yeah, just actually today I was listening to The Waggle. That's the podcast put out by the CFL, hosted by Donovan Bennett. And they had a really great show today. Donovan's guest was quarterback Dane Evans of the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Dane is of Chickasha, Oklahoma. And he, which may be a surprise to many, has indigenous heritage of the Wichita status in his ancestry. And those two just had a really interesting conversation about Dane's indigenous identity and the wider cause of truth and reconciliation. So I really enjoyed that show. And this feature today was one of the things that the league is doing right now to recognize the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, which was most known also as Orange Shirt Day. And this is happening as a officially recognized holiday tomorrow, September 30th in Canada. So this day's come out of our nation's reckoning of a very dark history of the oppression and cultural genocide of Indigenous peoples, a history of residential schools, which we've had in both of our countries, but these were established with the intent of erasing Indigenous language and identity and culture. And this is kind of coming to a head now. I mean, of course, it's always been there in history, but a few months ago, 215 bodies of children in unmarked graves were, I'm hesitating to say found or discovered, because it was known by Indigenous peoples that they were there, but found at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. And, people had been telling us that these children were there in unmarked graves for a long time, but our dominant culture worked hard to suppress those truths. And so now we're at a real moment here where our national identity is in question, and this is one of a really large issue being talked about. And so now it's undeniable that about what had happened in the past, and finally we're at a point where it is known, understood, and acknowledged, and now being recognized nationally, so that those Indigenous stories and voices are continued to be given space, and those of us who are settler colonizers acknowledge that history, take the time to learn what had happened not only in the past, but recognizing the injustice that continues today and the systemic barriers that Indigenous peoples have.
Yes, it's a good thing that people are starting to do this and this has come out. So I don't know a whole lot about it, but this is the first year of this National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. And how did this come to be?
Yeah, this was, so if you watched the BC Lions game last week, we saw a residential school survivor interviewed, Phyllis Webstad. And this started with her telling her story. She told this story in 2013, and it grew this movement of Orange Shirt Day. But when she was a child, age 6, I assume in the maybe 70s, that it was her first day attending an Indian residential school. And it needs to be stressed that the last of these schools in Canada closed in 1996. And that's one of the areas of history where I think we haven't been well aware of how recent these things happened. I think a lot of Canadians kind of think of that as something that happened over 100 years ago. And, it's not. So anyway, Webstad shared this story. about her first day of school, proudly wearing a brand new orange shirt bought by her for her grandmother, and upon arrival at the school, having all of her possessions and clothing stripped away from her. And from that moment in 2013, in the telling of this story, this movement grew, I think, first in British Columbia in the school systems as Orange Shirt Day for Indigenous peoples, and then grew quickly into a national movement and into the national consciousness. So now we're honoring this day tomorrow officially for the first time, and National Day of Truth and Reconciliation is asking Canadians to listen and to learn, to reflect on and name the ugly truths of the past and the present, and taking those first steps towards that journey of reconciliation and justice for Indigenous peoples. We had a commission for truth and reconciliation present 94 calls to action, measurable calls, changes to be made in Canadian society that would move us towards true reconciliation. These are as wide-ranging as telling the stories of Indigenous athletes in Canada, to the creation of university programs focused on Indigenous culture, preserving and teaching flourishing Indigenous languages, to things like eliminating overrepresentation of Indigenous youth in custody in Canada. So there are 94 calls that are being moved forward right now in this effort for reconciliation.
Yeah, very important stuff. Very important. I'm glad the CFL has decided to do this. This is something that I heard about, earlier in the summer. Didn't quite understand at the time what the impact was, but yeah, it's very important. And we wanted to mention it here up front before we got started. Got a little serious here, but we're gonna transition to last week's games, and we covered the first part of Hamilton, Ottawa to about halftime because it was a Wednesday night game. So the final score of that game was Hamilton 24, Ottawa 7, and it was really an ugly game, in weather and performance. Looking at the game, you're thinking, okay, we got Dominic Davis, we got Matt Nichols, both went down to injury. They had to have a receiver, Nate Bahar, finish the game at quarterback, and it was ugly, to say, on Ottawa's part. After watching that game, I thought there was no way that Ottawa is anywhere close to, sniffing the playoffs, sniffing a win this year. They just looked so bad on offense. What was your take of this particular game?
Yeah, I'm having trouble putting myself back in that game last week because the win from Ottawa last night is so fresh. But
Yeah.
yeah, that was just an awful, awful performance. And to see those two quarterbacks go down too was really rough to see, and something really not great for the league and for the fans. And of course, you never want to see players injured at all. That's been quite the topic of conversation this week, with two quarterbacks being on the CFL rosters. This was something that I think was influenced by the NFL having done the same thing, dressing
Mhm.
only two quarterbacks, with teams kind of taking the chance that, well, the number one and number two quarterbacks, they both, for both of them to go out of a game with serious injury happens like, never, once in 10 years or whatever.
Mhm.
And then we saw it in that game last week, and it was just brutal. And it makes the league, it makes everything look bad when you have a receiver coming into the game as a quarterback because you don't have one dressed and on the roster. So I don't know. I hope the league revisits that one. I mean, I think that was a decision that the owners and the teams and the players union too probably were all on board with. Teams are trying to save money. General managers and coaches want more flexibility with the way that they construct their rosters. So I think a lot of them were like, we'd much rather dress, another special teams player than having to dress a third quarterback. And so this might be on them a little bit too, because they're not prohibited from dressing a third quarterback right now. They just
Hmm.
can't have them in that quarterback designation on the chart. And so, yeah, it came to bite the Ottawa Red Blacks, and a team that was already facing misfortune at a level that you couldn't imagine. But
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And talking about the NFL just briefly, last year they had a problem in Denver, with COVID, where the quarterback room, I guess with contact tracing, had to sit out a game, and they had to start a wide receiver at quarterback, which was totally awful. It was terrible. That it was. I know he probably didn't throw for 30 or 40 yards in that game, and I don't know. I don't know. Is this is this something you think that will go forward? The two quarterbacks dressing, or do you think we'll get a third?
yeah, I'm not sure. And there's questions about the Canadian American ratio that come into play as well, because those
Hmm.
quarterbacks are designated quarterbacks. That's a separate designation from the American Canadian global designation. So it's a little bit complex, but I think at the same time, it just doesn't make any sense. The game is so quarterback centered, and so the development of quarterbacks is so important. I mean, I think we got treated to a treat last night seeing Caleb Evans perform so well, but these guys, to have a third guy on the bench, looking at Toronto's game the other night too,
Hmm.
where we saw Antonio Pipkin getting meaningful reps, and that's only because Nick Arbuckle's hurt. But I mean, I think Toronto would probably now love to have all three of them on the roster because of what they bring. So yeah, for the salary question, I mean, your backup quarterback in the CFL almost always has CFL experience, and so may command a higher salary, maybe even
Hmm.
almost a starter's salary, like somebody like McLeod Bethel Thompson that we see. But the third quarterback on a CFL team is such a developmental quarterback, usually doesn't have any pro experience, because teams want a guy who is 23, 24 years old that they can groom and take the time with. And so, I suppose they're on the sidelines in, sweats, not in equipment, but it's
Right.
still, for them to be on the team in equipment on the sidelines, I think makes a huge difference for their development. So
Hmm.
I don't know. I think a lot of people are saying it's something the league needs to revisit. So hopefully we see three on the rosters in the future.
Yes. Yes. That's not fun when you have a game that is just that ugly because you have to put a receiver in. I wanted to just talk about Hamilton real quick because they've had some injuries to their quarterbacks, and they've gone with David Wadford here the last couple games, and he's really been unspectacular, but he's been winning games. Hasn't thrown for a lot of yards. That game, he only had 115 passing yards. He had one touchdown. He didn't make any mistakes. He rushed for 54 yards, but they're only asking him to do certain things. And right now they're winning. They're winning until they can get Dane Evans back. What is your take on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I say it every week. My Toronto Argonauts friends, you two, Bill, are going to get upset with me, but I just think Hamilton is such a good team that they can play a really safe, conservative offense
Mhm.
and maintain ball control and don't turn the ball over. And their defense and special teams can win games for them. That they're hard to run against. They've got a great secondary. They've got Frankie Williams as a returner. Like, it's just that's a tough team to beat. No, one of those wins with Watford did come against Ottawa, so they're going to get a better test this week, where we see if they can, beat Montreal coming to town, which will be a little bit different. But I wouldn't change too much there if I were them, because it seems to be working, and Watford's maturing. He's gotten
Right.
better week to week, and they're telling him, I'm sure, manage the game, don't turn the ball over, and he hasn't done that yet, and just keeps getting better. So That's one thing I'm really excited about watching this week is that game with Montreal to see if Hamilton can continue with that kind of game plan on offense and keep winning.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Montreal this past week, going into Toronto and losing a close one, 27-30. So I thought that was a bit of a surprise. I did terribly in Pick'em last week. I was wrong. Maybe I picked Ottawa to lose, but other than that, I was wrong on all the other games. So
you picked Montreal to win.
I did. I did. I just
Mhm.
keep thinking that Montreal is going to get it together because they had it together in 2019. They need to cut back the turnovers and the penalties, and they didn't do that again this last week. They had over 500 yards of offense,
Yes.
and they lost that game. They lost that game because they had what did they have for penalties? 100 and I don't know what it was, 130 yards
Yeah, it
penalties
was
or
a lot of
something.
penalties, and the turnovers were very costly. There was a few of them, as they're in almost like their red zone, getting ready to score. They had a fumble, and you know Vernon Adams has really struggled at times, and I've sort of here's my take on him. When he's in the pocket and he gets pressure, he's not a very good quarterback. When he's on it, he's scrambling out of the pocket and making something happen on the edges. Now, but sometimes he'll scramble out of the pocket and throw the ball back to the middle of the field, and that's another place where he struggles. He 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 always wants to keep the play alive and not take the sack, not take a negative play. But I think sometimes with growth of a quarterback, you need to learn how to do that. You need to learn how to throw the ball away sometimes. Maybe it's better to punt sometimes than have a turnover on a bad decision. So that's one thing I've been noticing because William Stanback had 133 yards rushing and a touchdown. I'm sorry, if you have 133 yards in a game, 9 times out of 10 you're winning the game, especially in the CFL.
Yeah,
Because the
absolutely, and what
way it
was he averaging, 8 or 10 yards a carry or something too? He was
yeah,
unstoppable.
yep,
So you had 382 yards of passing offense with Vernon Adams going 30 of 39, and then William Stanback having a huge game, but those 2 interceptions and the fumble and all of the
yep.
penalties, yeah,
Yeah,
just sunk
absolutely,
him.
and, McLeod Bethel Thompson, which I wasn't expecting him to start, through the middle of the week, we heard that, Arbuckle was injured, and, McLeod Bethel Thompson and I didn't think, when he has come in the past, there was the one game he didn't play too well, but like these one game stints, he seems to come in and play really well. I mean, he played pretty awesome in this game. And
He
there's
did.
another guy that I've been looking at the last couple weeks and saying they need to get his hands on the ball more, and that was Chandler Worthy.
Yeah.
And he was pretty incredible, especially except on a turnover, he had on a kick return, but he's a weapon. And they finally got a long touchdown from him, and it was an exciting game. Chris
What a
Jones
great
is
play
first.
call. Sorry to interrupt,
Oh yes,
just right before the half to
yep,
take that shot to Worthy
yep,
because they had come close the week before, to just be that aggressive before the half, and then Worthy makes up, for his botch play before that.
right.
Really exciting, and then Damien Jean-Pierre also kinda had his breakout game too,
Hmm.
and to see those guys stepping up on offense, yeah, it's great to see for Toronto. Do you see a quarterback controversy brewing in Toronto, or do you think that they can just run with, whoever's having
It's hard.
success?
It's hard to say. I mean, you know, one plays and then struggles. The other one come in. I mean, we're midway through here, but both of them has played well at times, and both of them has struggled at times.
Mhm.
I don't know if they really have an identity as of yet on offense. Because they do things well one week, and then the next week, like the running game didn't do too much this week. So I don't know. Another thing I wanted to mention is Chris Jones, his first time calling the defense as the D coordinator. Was there anything that you saw that you noticed a difference from him calling the defense?
Oh yeah, I think so. He loves to bring pressure on the quarterback,
Mhm.
mixing up the blitz looks, bringing defensive backs from lots of different positions. He really focuses on his defensive line coaching. And so I think their defense was a lot more aggressive this week and a lot more taking a lot more risk. And really, they weren't very good. I mean, this was not a really solid game from the Toronto Argonauts
No, it
defense.
wasn't.
And I think that that's because there was a change. I don't think Jones overhauled the defensive scheme, and yet you could see that he had already put his stamp on that defense. I think Rich Stubler focuses much more, has a reputation for a bend don't break defense, kind of with lots of DBs keeping everything in front of them, and Chris Jones has quite a different philosophy. Jones is very complimentary of Stubler and thought it was great that both of their minds could work on a defense together, but they have quite different defensive philosophies, and that's going to be something that's going to be interesting in the coming weeks as we really transition from that Glenn Young Stubler defense to the Chris Jones defense.
And to their defense of not playing too well, they were missing a couple linebackers to injury, so that that run defense definitely didn't fare as well at home as they have been. So
Yeah, that's a great point. I thought those linebackers would be able to step up and match the play of Enoch Muamba and Cam Judge. And, I certainly think that Vontae Diggs and Dexter McCoyle are great linebackers, but
mhm.
they are probably not the run stoppers, certainly that Muamba is. And you're going up against the best running back in the CFL too, I think so. But it's true, they didn't have a great day either.
Right. So Montreal made a comeback here. Jake Winicky made a great catch there with like a minute or so left. And you look up spectacular catches in the CFL this year, and he's going to be close to the top of the list because
Oh yeah.
there's about 3 or 4 catches that he's made this year that are pretty incredible. His hands are, the way he can control the ball, you know, midair and diving, that sort of thing. So he's fun to watch. And Montreal just didn't have, too little, too late here, and as
Yeah.
said, the
Winicky and
turnovers.
Standback were my studs last week. Remember that? That was
Yes,
a good
yes.
call. Was actually pretty
Actually,
slow
well,
going that game until the end, but then he had that 50 whatever yard grab and then the touchdown following. It's like, whew.
and actually, if you remember, one of your duds was, DeVaris Daniels, and
Yes. And what was he, 1 for 9 or
yeah,
something? It
one
was
catch. Yep, yep.
rough.
So we'll head to our Saturday night game, and that was the Saskatchewan Roughriders at the BC Lions. It was Saskatchewan 31, BC 24, and it was a great matchup for we were seeing who was going to be second place. And BC had been winning some games convincingly on offense, and then Saskatchewan turned, they had 2 losses in a row, and they sort of turned it around the last game. So this was basically for second place in the West, and it was really a great game. I 2 great quarterbacks. I really enjoyed this one. The first thing I want to mention about this game, and we keep mentioning this guy, and I think we're going to mention him the rest of the season, and that's Lucky Whitehead.
Lucky.
Just an amazing talent. Amazing. He takes that one uh, pass and he goes around the outside, and it's just like a punt return. He takes it all the way for a touchdown. And all we get is amazing plays out of this guy. What's your take on this?
Yeah, until there are 2 seconds left, but you're totally right. Lucky Whitehead
Right.
is just, I mean, he's amazing, and what his speed allows them to do. I think you saw two really contrasting offenses, BC has and increasingly relied on that long ball. Well, I guess, or that big play potential of Lucky Whitehead, where Brian Burnham had a pretty humble night, and I think he was playing hurt. But it just seems like more and more Whitehead is the go-to receiver there, and they kind of live and die by the big play a little bit. They had so much success in those games leading up to this game with Saskatchewan, but whereas Saskatchewan is much more a kind of nickel and dime offense, taking a little bit at a time. And it was interesting to see those two come, head to head. But I think the BC Lions are coming out of this game feeling like they should have won this game.
Oh,
And
absolutely,
I think
absolutely.
they should have won this game.
They had some critical mistakes, and the mistakes started, with this awful, and it might be the worst punt that I've ever seen. I mean, if they wanted to punt that bad, they could have called me, and I could have kicked it about that far. But it was a horrible punt there. Did that surprise you? How awful that was? Because he
Yeah,
looked like.
absolutely. And at the worst possible time, and somebody who's played pretty well too. So that was just one of those, maybe, maybe the pressure was on, maybe it was
Mhm.
just fate, but that was a
And
huge
then,
part of turning the game. And yet I'll say that Cody Fajardo deserves a ton of credit for the way
oh,
that he
absolutely.
bounced back after throwing an awful interception. Like, just, he had been playing so well, and then he made a really poor decision on that interception when it looked like they were in a good spot to win the game. And after that, I was out. I'm like, oh, this is over. There's no way. And I guess he went back to the bench. And, this was a story coming into this game that Cody'd been having, a tough time on social media with those two losses to Winnipeg.
Mhm.
Fans anywhere can be pretty ruthless, but Rider fans can be pretty nasty when the team's losing. And he was, starting to ban people and feeling a little down about those losses. And I think he went to the bench, and the guys built him up. And yeah, just, Coach Moss, I think, just looked him in the eye and said, you're going to go down, you're going to drive the team down the field and score a touchdown, because that's what you do, and that's what we ask you to do. And I've got 100% confident in your ability to do that. And incredible what happened. It
Yes,
was
yes, yes. They struggled
awesome.
the first half here with scoring touchdowns. They took, what, 4 field goals in the first half, and that was basically the difference of the halves. Is, they couldn't convert to the touchdown, and then the second half they kind of you know there was the mistakes that BC made. They kind of took advantage of that, and one was very interesting. Me being an American football fan, was the muffed punt, that we had there in the second half. And in the CFL, it isn't who recovered it or fumbled it out of bounds or muffed it out of the bounds. It's the last person to touch
Touch it,
the
right?
ball, they get the ball. And I found that quite interesting. Has this been a rule that's been around for a while, or is it's something new, or?
Yeah, that is one of the rules that's different in this
Mhm.
league, and has always been that way. Yeah,
That's very
so on
cool. It's an
a
interesting
play where a
aspect.
player loses possession of the ball and it is a loose ball, a player only needs to be the last player to touch it before it goes out of bounds to claim possession.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's cool. It's a different, it makes it exciting, you know.
Mhm.
More pressure on the returner. You do have that 5, they're supposed to have that 5-yard, boundary, where players can't be within 5 yards when you grab the ball, and it does make it interesting. That's for sure. Um the other part I wanted to say is, you know, coming out of this game, Saskatchewan is in pretty good shape, and BC isn't in bad shape. But I think that the lack of running game for BC at some point is going to come back to haunt them a little bit. Somehow they have to get that figured out. They have an awesome passing attack. It's just the running game just not just I don't know if they don't have the talent or what it is. What is your take on that?
Yeah, it's really almost non-existent, and they've tried to get, and well, and actually in the very beginning of the season, it was going not too bad, right? With Butler was their ball carrier because Shaq
Mhm.
Cooper was out and Cooper came back, but it seems like they've almost just abandoned it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess you've got a great passing quarterback and some really
Well,
awesome weapons as receivers, but that balanced attack and keeping a defense honest, I think, is so
yeah.
important that that question will be answered this week, I think, when they host the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, because I think you're right. You need to have a little bit more of a balanced attack. That's how Toronto beat Winnipeg.
No,
You
it'll
know,
be a great test for, BC's defense and, you know, their lack of running game. We'll see what happens this weekend. Interesting game, that's for sure. That's for sure. So, any, final thoughts on this game?
oh, yeah, no, I think not really. This didn't do much for adjusting, power rankings in the league. I think
Right.
BC and Saskatchewan were really close, and maybe Saskatchewan had the edge. Now, maybe they would definitely be 2 with BC at 3, but I mean, BC is a really good team. That
Yeah,
is
they are.
clear that people should have been talking about the BC Lions a little bit more earlier in the season, and now they're starting to show people that they've got all kinds of weapons. They've got an outstanding rookie middle linebacker. They're
Absolutely.
but we'll see if they can beat Winnipeg. Then things will become really confusing at the top of those power rankings.
Absolutely, but, as the standings go, things are starting to separate a little. You have, if the playoffs started today, we would have I think it's one team that would make the playoffs having a losing record. All the other teams have winning records. So I think you're going to continue to see, teams separate themselves, and some of the teams at the bottom, they need to start changing things. And as we had, in our week 9 preview, we've already had a game in week 9 because
Yeah,
we had
that's
a
right.
Tuesday nighter. And it's like, what's better than football on a Tuesday night? That's incredible. But I'll be honest, going into this game and hearing, who was playing, I'm like, this doesn't sound like a great game. I wanted it to be a great game, and then I did hear, they had first year rookie Caleb Evans starting, which I didn't know too much about. And right off the beginning of this game, he looked incredible. Great play calling, had a trick play where the receiver threw it to a guy down the middle of the field. They ended up scoring a touchdown. Um, and it really gave Ottawa a boost. They're home. They've been losing, and they've been losing ugly. Not a lot of offense, and he really gave them a spark. He really gave them a spark, and the final score of that game was Ottawa 34, Edmonton 24. So, what did you think of this game?
Oh, that was incredible. I couldn't believe it. I was a huge Ottawa Red Blacks fan last night, and I just got caught up in that wave, that great flea flicker in the beginning of the game,
Oh
and then the
yeah,
touchdown that followed. And you know what? I was really rooting for Caleb Evans and Taryn Christian, who we didn't get to see. They thought that both would play, but I think Caleb Evans was playing so well that he carried the team for the game. But I was a little bit irked by all of the Devlin Hodges talk, and I don't want to diminish who he is as a player or quarterback,
hmm
but a lot of the talk leading into this game was about him, and he was still in quarantine. He's practiced 2 times, and hardly anyone was talking about the 2 quarterbacks that have been with the team. Some of the, like, going back to last season or whatever, and not telling us who these quarterbacks are who are going to go play. And so I was so happy to see Caleb Evans have that success. At Louisiana Monroe, Evans threw for 9,513 yards and 58 touchdowns. He added 2,168 rushing yards and 36 scores on the ground. That's over 3 seasons. Um, so
incredible.
it was so fantastic to see him come in and succeed, and that alone, never mind the win for Ottawa fans and the team and coaches too, see a quarterback come in and throw 3 touchdowns and no interceptions, the first time since 1982, I think an Ottawa quarterback has had a debut like that. That had
Incredible.
to lift that whole team and fan base, and you could see it, the
Yeah.
sidelines, the players were just amped, like, they were so happy to be scoring and winning and seeing Evans, having success, and it was a
And
really
you could see it with the
enjoyable game.
body language of the coach also, Police. I mean, in some previous games, he's standing there with his arms folded and, just staring, looking like, I don't know what to do next. And you could tell his body language was more positive than it's been, and it was exciting. It was exciting for the fans, for the Ottawa fans to see this. And on the other side, Edmonton, they were starting, Taylor Cornelius again. He threw for a lot of yards, had a couple turnovers. Just he's a young guy that's what his second start and struggling a little bit. I don't know how Trevor Harris is going to be out, but I don't know. It doesn't look their future at the moment doesn't look too good.
It doesn't. I don't know what's up with that team. Got to the game, of course, the turnovers again really hurt the Edmonton Elks and hurt Taylor Cornelius. Not unlike the Toronto Montreal game where you saw Cornelius playing a bit of the gunslinger role, throwing for 344 yards, but like Vernon Adams, also throwing 2 interceptions that were costly, and they weren't able to really get back into the game. It got somewhat close, but
Hmm.
can't turn the ball over like that. So I think they've slipped to the bottom of the West standings below Calgary because they have one more loss now, and they're gonna have to figure things out quickly in Edmonton, or there's gonna be people on the hot seat there too, because I'm sure the fans and the players aren't happy. Darrell Walker, 3 catches for 31 yards. Where is Walker? I mean, Ellingson, usually it's one of them has a big game, so
Yeah,
maybe that's it. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. It was Ellingson's week this week to have 100 plus, but yeah, I was gonna say I don't know what they are. Their identity is still kind of to be determined, but there's definitely some problems there.
I mean, offensively, if you look at their 2019 team, especially on offense or receivers, 2 of their receivers went to Toronto, and Ricky Collins Jr. and DeVaris Daniels, and that's some big losses there. So I
Yeah,
don't
and yet they have what some people would think is the best duo of receivers in the league in Walker and
right.
Ellingson, but yeah, it's a big turnover there and a new head coach and all of it. So
Yep.
I think it's a surprise for a lot of people, though. Some people were picking them to come out first in the West this year because of all the talent stocked on that team, but hasn't come
That's
together
that's
yet.
that's what they always say.
Good on
Wait.
paper.
Yep. Good on paper. Wait till you play the game, the actual game, to see, how it all plays out. And that's the fun of it, though, is watching these games. So our next game is going to be Friday night. It's Winnipeg at BC. It's a late one because it's in BC.
Always
It's
is.
10 p.m. Eastern. So is that a game you're looking forward to? We talked about it briefly, but that seems pretty exciting. See if
Oh, yeah.
BC is made of anything. So
I think I'll be able to stay up late for that one. I'm really looking forward to seeing somebody else beat the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, honestly. I think BC's a team that can do it with the
oh
weapons
yes,
that they have, and they are going to be angry coming off of that loss to Saskatchewan, and that is often great fuel. I think that they will come out to play. I can't say that BC is going to win that game, but I think it'll be a heck of a game and should be really good.
absolutely, absolutely. We got a comment here. Um, Thoughts on Boston College beating Clemson this weekend? I don't know. We talk CFL on here, so I'm not too familiar about college, so I'll have to I'll have to pass on that question.
Yeah, I'm afraid I can't take that one either. But if Mr. Suggs is watching, check out the CFL. We're trying to grow new CFL fans right now. All the games are on ESPN Plus, and then if you throw us a question about those games, we'll be more than happy to answer. But I'm sorry we can't take that one. But I know there are other shows on the All Sports All Plays network that will gladly discuss that college football question.
Absolutely, absolutely. So as we head into Saturday's matchups, we got Montreal at Hamilton, and we have Montreal needs to limit those turnovers and penalties, and Hamilton, what they've been doing on offense is working so far. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's gonna be a great one too. I love the lineup of games this week. Again, there are just so many questions about every team that we're still trying to answer. Can Hamilton continue with this David Watford offense? And can Montreal find a more disciplined game where they can cut back on these lousy penalties and poor decision making that leads to turnovers? That should be a good
Yeah,
one as well.
yeah, yep. So absolutely. So then our final game, is Saskatchewan and Calgary, and Calgary had a week off. Saskatchewan probably needs to establish their running game and stretch the field a little bit. Uh, Calgary, Bo Levi Mitchell is the real Bo Levi Mitchell out there? He's gonna show up?
Yeah, and
So
is the real Bo Levi Mitchell still the real Bo Levi Mitchell? It's shocking. There
mhm,
are two quarterbacks in the league who have seen meaningful reps that have more interceptions than touchdowns. And Bo Levi Mitchell has two touchdowns and seven interceptions. And
which
he
is
is
crazy.
almost always the flip side of that ratio. So it's shocking. I know he's had injury, but he's also played poorly. And that's big question marks in Calgary for sure.
Yeah,
It's so
and when
strange to see them at the bottom of the standings. I'll never get used to it.
absolutely, and when you have an injury and you're coming off, an injury and you may not be, because we originally heard he was going to be out like 6 weeks. When you come back in a little early, I mean, you want to play and you have all this emotion to play. You might be favoring things a little bit and not being 100%. And I don't know what's going on. They've struggled, throughout the season in different phases. So we'll see. It should be interesting. Saskatchewan is going to Calgary, and you never know. It's in Calgary, so anything could happen. So that's another good good games we have here. So
That's going
yeah,
to be a
I'm look
good test. Saskatchewan's got to be careful. I think I'm not sure Cody Fajardo has a very good record against Calgary actually, thinking about it. And Calgary's going to figure things out at some point. You have to think. They still have great coaching and players. So I think this might be a bit of a trap game for Saskatchewan. They're going to really have to be at their best, I think. And
absolutely.
and this is
Yeah.
and these talk about strange CFL scheduling this season with the shortened season and COVID rescheduling and everything else. I know we've just had this Tuesday night game, which was actually on the regular schedule that didn't have anything to do with rescheduling. That sure messes up fantasy. I'm not sure if you noticed that too. And
Oh yes.
some of those things and doing podcasts I've seen around the CFL podcast community too, trying to plan shows around Tuesday, Wednesday games. But Saskatchewan and Calgary are going to meet 3 games in a row with this game this week.
That's crazy.
That's almost
3 games in a row.
worrisome because you know how ugly a second game gets in a back to
Yeah.
back with tempers flying and
Right.
things boiling over. But I'm not sure I've ever seen a series where teams in the CFL have played three games in a row.
And is it
It's
is it is
it
it
should be
bounce? I
good.
haven't looked at the schedule. Are they bouncing back and forth between, home and away, or
Yeah,
is
I
it
think so. Take a look
interesting?
now,
It'll
but
it'll be
that's
interesting, that's for sure. Because You never really get the only game that we got, back to back so far that wasn't as predictable was, your Winnipeg and Saskatchewan game where it was Winnipeg 2 in the row, but the other games, really, really did change a little bit. So yeah,
A
I'm
bit of a
looking.
correction there. So Saskatchewan's next 3 games are against Calgary, but there is a bye week in there. So
Okay.
Calgary goes Saskatchewan, Saskatchewan, BC, Saskatchewan. So a big string of games for the Calgary Stampeders coming up
Yeah, absolutely.
against some fierce opponents. I wonder how many of those they'll be able to take.
Yes. So, well, let's go ahead and let's head to our fantasy segment, and we're going to talk about fantasy studs and fantasy duds. So, last week you had made some predictions, and we talked about a few of them. You said William Stanback and Winicky you had as your studs, I believe. And then you said DeVaris Daniels and Daniel Peterman. Daniel Peterman didn't have any receptions at all.
Hmm.
So you were pretty on for that.
That'll
For
never
the
happen again, I'm sure.
you sure about that?
Overall, I don't think I had a very good fantasy week, but I'm
So no, I had an
thanks
awful
for building me up.
week. I had like 53 points overall. It was not a good week. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if you should take any advice that I give about fantasy, but I'm going to give my fantasy studs and duds from this past week. And I have to start out with Lucky Whitehead, of course. 31.60 fantasy points, 6,800 price point. His price is just going to start going up and up and up. With these games, spectacular games he has, it's another one. He almost has to go in your fantasy roster the way he's been playing.
It's true.
And I have a couple other studs, and my next stud was the Tiger Cats defense, which was 19 fantasy points. They had a price point of 5,000. That was a good play this week.
Oh, yeah.
They were playing the Red Blacks, so at that point you thought that was like the best defense to play that week. And the other one was, and I didn't play him. I thought about it. I think I had him in my lineup briefly, and that was Chandler Worthy. He had
Mhm.
22 fantasy points, 5,600 price point. So, yeah, there's a couple guys, especially if you're playing the fantasy in big tournaments, where there's a big prize at the end. You have to get guys in there that not everybody's picking, because you sort of have to be out on top. You can't pick what everybody else is picking, but you still have to score a bunch of points.
Yeah,
So,
that's right. Just about everybody's gonna take Lucky Whitehead, so you need to hit
yeah,
the home run with somebody
right.
else
Right. And in the
quite
CFL,
often.
it's hard. It's hard to
Mm.
know who's going to stand up that week. And my fantasy duds for this week, um, I had DeVaris Daniels, of course. He had 1.95 fantasy points, 7,600, and you predicted that. I don't know. You might be on a roll here. We'll have to keep
Mhm.
track of this, and And John White was my second dud. He had 4.5 fantasy points, 6,500 price point. And my third dud was Brian Burnham, who has a 9,800 price point. He scored 7.10 fantasy points, but for paying almost 10,000, that's not going to get it done, especially in these tournaments and that sort of thing. So,
Mhm.
so as far as this week goes, do you have anybody that you think's going to be your fantasy stud or dud?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm one game in, and I had a couple of good picks, or decent. So I've got Devontae Dedmon, who had 16 points in the game last night, and James Wilder Jr. with 14.9. So those were good. But you know what I also
Mm-hmm.
did is I went and picked the Elks D. I imagine a lot of people did, so it might not hurt me that much, but they had a big goose egg, giving up
Yes,
34 points. So that was a
absolutely.
lousy pick. And I have taken Cody Fajardo this week, which means that I spent an awful lot of dough on Fajardo and James Wilder Jr. So I'm left with kind of value pickings with the rest of the roster. So I'm not sure how my week's going to end up, but I've got Jamal Morrow for the Rough Riders and also um, Ricardo Lewis, and then Stephen Dunbar Jr. as well in Hamilton. We'll see. We'll see how those go. But back to your Chandler Worthy comment. I mean, this is a trend we're seeing in the CFL right now, where teams have seen BC's success with
Mhm.
Whitehead as a part of the offense, and I think everyone is looking to their, their 4-2-40 special teams returner, saying we need to get that guy into the offense. And Dedmon's getting a little bit of touches for Ottawa on the O.
Right.
Chandler Worthy's getting in there for Toronto, and those players make and break games. And if you can put Chandler Worthy out there and stretch a defense, and hit that long ball one time in a game for that long touchdown, that's going to be huge. So those kind of special teams players, Ryan Davis as well in Ottawa, when Dedmon isn't returning, I think Ryan Davis still returns kickoffs, but those guys are coming up with big plays, and teams
Yeah.
are realizing that they want to use that speed on offense as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, I could even see it, especially with Chandler Worthy. It's like get his hands on the ball. He had like a screen pass the week before, and it's like, get his hands on the ball, see what he can do. So my fantasy lineup for this coming week, I don't know what's going to happen here, but I had, of course, the Edmonton Elks in already,
Yeah,
and
the
they have,
defense too.
yeah, the
Of
defense.
course.
And I had Mike Jones for
0.
Edmonton. He didn't do much. I don't even know if he caught a pass. If he did, it was only one pass. I have Zach Caleros, James Wilder Jr. At my other running back is Milanovic Leetry,
Mm-hmm.
which I didn't have a lot. He was only 3,000, so I had to find somebody. He does get occasional carry here or there, reception of Darwin Adams, and this pick, Keon Schaefer Baker. He had an off week this past week, but he's been doing some things. So I'm thinking maybe
Yeah.
when we
What's
might
his
see
price
something
up
out of
to
him.
now? He's not 2,500 anymore. Is he over 4,000 yet?
He's 35.90.
Yeah. Okay. Still sounds
So
like a good deal to me.
yeah,
I like
yeah.
that.
So we'll see what happens
Mhm.
this week.
I guess some other injury and fantasy news. Braylon Addison's been activated. I'm not sure I would go and pick him for fantasy when guys are coming off a long-term injury. They don't very often have, a half a dozen targets in a huge breakout game. I think they'll work
Hmm.
him in slowly, but that is great news for Braylon Addison, the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and the CFL. We need our brightest stars playing. Shaq Evans in Saskatchewan is practiced this week or jogged and, caught some balls. So he's on his way to recovery as well. But those are two of the premier receivers in this league, and we need to see those guys playing. So some great news on that front.
Absolutely. We had Shaq Evans play a few games at the beginning of the season, but Braylon Addison hasn't played all year.
That's right.
And I don't know anything. I haven't seen him on the field at all since this is my first year with the CFL. So it'll be exciting. I don't know if they'll change the game plan with David Walkford. Um, so we'll see what happens. I don't know how far have you heard anything about Dean Evans or Jeremiah Masoli as far as coming
No,
back? Or
not really. I mean, I think Masoli's definitely closer. He's been on the roster, but I think that sounds not great too. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it'll be a while yet. I think Evans was 6-gamed. So
and you want to tell everybody about our little fantasy group that we have?
yeah, let's get people to join us. So yeah, Bill and I are in fantasy leagues for the 3-minute warning, all sports, all plays, and you can find us both on the CFL Pick'em, where you just pick the winners of the games and you can weight your confidence on which teams you think are going to win or lose. So that's a really accessible, easy one to play. Not easy to succeed, though. I think I'm at about 40% correct on those, but easy to play. And then the one that we talk about a little more with the studs and duds is the CFL Fantasy, where you build a roster with a limited number of salary dollars with assigned positions. So look up 3-Minute Warning on CFL Fantasy and CFL Pick'em, and we'd love to have you join our leagues and get in on the banter and discussion and a little bit of bragging rights too. It just makes following the league so much more fun. So hope you'll join us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So before we get out of here, we also wanted to let you know that we are on Apple Podcasts, we're on Google Podcasts, we're on anywhere you get your audio podcasts and your pod catchers. So we're not just in video to see our pretty faces here. We're in audio where you can listen to if you're more into audio and want to check us out there. Or you watched it and you said, these guys are so good, I need to listen to it again. Then there you have an audio version that's out there. So
Yeah, let's hope. Please check those out. We and listen to all of the podcasts from the CFL pod community. I had such a great time this week listening to the Mouchoir Red Blacks podcast and the Waggle from the CFL. And there's just so much great content out there. So listen to those communities and yeah, follow us and find us however you prefer to consume these things, whether it's YouTube or Spotify or Podbean or wherever else. But the more people we have listening and supporting the grassroots, fan communities and podcasters, it's a really great community to have people connect over that and connect with us on Twitter as well.
Absolutely. And talking about podcasts, audio podcasts, that's how I got my start into all this. And it's such a great community to be part of. There's so many great people. The CFL podcast I've listened to a bunch. There's still some out there that I haven't listened to yet that I'm going to check out, but they're so great and informative. I mean, I learned mostly everything that I've learned about the CFL in the preseason was from these podcasts. And it wasn't necessarily guys, that are on TV talking about it. It's the fans that are talking about it. So I enjoy a whole lot, and I have them to thank for getting me, caught up into the CFL and that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, it's true. People are nice and supportive, and that's a great thing to see, especially on Twitter when sometimes people can be nasty, but the podcasts are always lifting each other up and creating conversation. So yeah, I hope you'll check those out.
Yes, absolutely. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. Again, we're a 3-Minute Warning, a Canadian Football League podcast. I'm Bill Beer at Pigskin Punk on Twitter. Dallas Bergen at CFL Fans Toronto. We're on the All Sports All Plays Network. We're on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and we're on Wednesdays live at 8 p.m. Eastern. So until next time, we will see you later.